At this moment, the story unfolds before them. They had been working at the company for several years, but their career felt like it was stuck in place. No matter how hard they worked, no matter how many extra hours they put in, they just couldn't seem to break through to the next level. The competition proved to be fierce, with the constant presence of others who seemed more impressive, better connected, or simply luckier. She wasn't miserable, but she wasn't exactly thriving either. They desired more, aware of their own capabilities, yet uncertain about how to progress. Olivia, the boss, was a woman who commanded respect from everyone and inspired at least a hint of fear. In her mid-40s, she was sharp, professional, and incredibly strict. She kept her personal life private at the office, and her colleagues were largely unaware of her life beyond work. There was speculation among some individuals regarding her personal life, yet no substantial information ever emerged. There was no mention of a husband, no photos displayed on her desk, and no casual conversations about weekend plans took place. Simply focus on the task at hand. She anticipated that others would demonstrate the same level of dedication. It was a regular Wednesday evening, and she was exhausted. Most people had already departed, but one individual remained behind to complete a report. As she finally packed up and headed toward the elevator, all that occupied her mind was the thought of getting home, taking a hot shower, and perhaps enjoying a drink before collapsing into bed. He stepped into the elevator and leaned against the wall, rubbing his temples. As the doors were on the verge of closing, Olivia made her entrance. She acknowledged David with a small nod. Ms. Carter was addressed with a reply as he stood up straighter. The doors closed, and the elevator began its ascent. The two of them were together, and he sensed the familiar tension that accompanied being alone with his boss, particularly one like her. He never really knew how to act around Olivia. She displayed a demeanor that was neither rude nor particularly friendly. She was the type of boss who commanded respect, yet maintained a serious demeanor that discouraged casual banter. They rode in silence for a few seconds, and then, suddenly, the elevator jerked to a stop. The lights flickered, and moments later, darkness enveloped the surroundings. "What on earth is happening?" he muttered under his breath. Olivia, showing no signs of concern, retrieved her phone and activated the flashlight. She pressed a few buttons on the elevator panel, yet nothing occurred. She let out a sigh before pressing the emergency button. A crackling voice emerged from the speaker. "A citywide power outage has occurred. They are aware of the situation, but it might take a while before the system can be running again. They would need to remain patient." "What is the duration?" Olivia inquired, her tone unwavering. "It would take at least an hour. It could be extended." A knot formed in their stomach. Being trapped in a small metal box wasn't exactly his idea of a good time, especially not with his boss. She wasn't claustrophobic, but something about being stuck with no control over the situation made her uneasy. With another sigh, Olivia leaned against the wall. "Excellent." He exhaled slowly, trying to keep calm. They wondered what their next steps should be. She looked at him, then at her phone. They stood in silence for a while. They could hear the distant hum of the emergency light, along with the occasional muffled sound from outside the shaft. The passage of time appeared to elongate. They shifted on their feet, feeling restless. They wondered if this would disrupt anything significant. They asked, merely to break the silence. Olivia cast a glance, weighing the decision of whether to partake in small talk. Finally, she mentioned that it was probably not the case, but there was a meeting in the morning that might require rescheduling. "Isn't that so?" He nodded, awkwardly clearing his throat. A prolonged silence lingered once more. She suddenly remarked that he seemed nervous. They laughed, though it seemed somewhat forced. It was certainly an unusual situation to find oneself trapped in an elevator alongside one's boss. She raised an eyebrow, remaining silent. They shifted again. "Does one feel nervous?" "They mean ever." For a moment, it seemed she might overlook the question, but then she tilted her head slightly. "It is not a frequent occurrence." There was something about the way she expressed it, calm and direct, almost resembling a fact rather than an opinion. "It must be nice," he muttered. She cast another glance in his direction. "What causes nervousness for you?" He hesitated, not moving forward, feeling as though he was stuck. The words escaped before there was a chance for reflection, and once they were spoken, the truth of them became evident. This elevator was not the only one involved. It was his entire career, his entire life. She remained silent for a moment, observing him closely. Then, to his surprise, she nodded slightly, as if she understood exactly what he meant. For the first time since the elevator had come to a halt, a sense of freedom began to wash over her. The silence in the elevator lingered. They checked their phone again. There was no signal. Olivia appeared entirely unbothered, her arms crossed as she waited. Meanwhile, their mind was relentless in its chatter. It wasn't merely the situation of being stuck. They found themselves stuck together. After a while, they shifted, trying to break the tension. It seems that they have encountered a situation like this before. She cast a glance in his direction. At one time, in a distant past, he expected her to leave it at that, but then she surprised him. They were in college. They found themselves stuck in a subway car for 2 hours. Amidst the chaos, others were in a state of panic, while one individual remained seated, calmly waiting. They concluded that it was pointless to expend energy on something beyond their control. He smirked. It seems to reflect their character. She raised an eyebrow, yet chose not to voice any disagreement. He leaned against the wall, gazing up at the emergency light. They didn't seem like the type to panic. They do not. She inclined her head slightly. They do. They wouldn't say that. He muttered, even though his nerves were obvious. She observed that he seemed tense. With a deep breath, they let out a sigh. It was not an everyday occurrence for her to have a one-on-one meeting with her boss in a broken elevator. That brought a smile to her face, only a small amount. However, it was the first time anyone had ever seen her display anything other than a serious demeanor. He hesitated before speaking again. May they inquire about something? She offered a slight nod. Why does she keep everything so private? It seemed that no one at the office had much knowledge about her. Olivia observed him for a moment, then turned her gaze elsewhere. Work is simply work. One's personal life remains a private matter. Indeed, even the most private individuals occasionally reveal something unintentionally. She wore a slight smirk. And what about him, David? What is known about an individual at the office? They thought about it. They thought there wasn't much, it seemed. Indeed. She looked at him again, her gaze sharper this time. They keep their personal life to themselves, too. So why would they ask her? He rubbed the back of his neck. That is a valid observation. She let out a sigh and leaned against the wall across from her. However, if one truly wishes to understand, it is simpler in this manner. Expectations arise from others when they believe they have a clear understanding of someone. She frowned. One should anticipate certain outcomes. She paused, uncertainty flickering in her mind. For the first time, she appeared to be genuinely contemplating whether to speak up. She expressed that there have been individuals who have assumed they could obtain something from her. His success implies that he owes them something, or that one should be generous. Though she didn't articulate it directly, he grasped her meaning. He nodded slowly. That is quite frustrating. She released a quiet laugh, though it lacked any trace of joy. They have no idea. He hesitated before speaking again. Did you mean the group of individuals? She cast a sharp look in his direction, yet it held no trace of anger. It was a sort of weary amusement, included with the rest. They considered that for a moment. Olivia achieved more than mere success. She possessed great power. He could see how that power led people to make assumptions about her. That was unfortunate, he said at last. She wore a smirk. It was quite eloquent. He chuckled. They are simply expressing that they understand. Individuals often fail to recognize someone for their true self. She observed him once more, this time for an extended period. To his surprise, she nodded. Indeed. He shifted on his feet, feeling as though he had just crossed some invisible line. They understood as well, they said. They meant it differently. Despite putting in tremendous effort, there remains a sense of stagnation. It seemed that no matter what was attempted, progress remained elusive. Her expression softened just slightly, and one might wonder if they truly deserve more. They shrugged. They believe they have earned it. A lengthy silence lingered between them. Then she uttered something that took him by surprise. It is likely that they have. He blinked. She paused, taken aback by the unexpected turn of events. She let out a breath. They have noticed your work. They are one of the few individuals who truly puts in the effort. However, mere effort does not always suffice. It is essential for the appropriate individuals to take notice at the opportune moment. They scoffed. Is it merely chance? At times, she acknowledged. At times, it involves understanding the ways to distinguish oneself. That remained with them. That was precisely the issue they faced. They didn't stand out. They completed their job. They worked hard. However, they never engaged in actions that would render them impossible to overlook. They opened their mouth to say something else. However, just as the moment approached, the elevator lights suddenly flickered back on. A moment later, the motor began to hum. The car jolted slightly before it began to move again. She let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Olivia looked at her watch. She pushed off the wall as she spoke. Their little conversation seemed to have come to an end. He nodded, still processing everything she had said. As the doors opened, she was the first to step out. Before he could follow, she paused and glanced back at him. David should consider what was said, and then she walked away, leaving him standing there, feeling as though he had just learned something important. A possibility that could truly transform everything. The elevator incident lingered in their mind. It wasn't merely the reality of being trapped. The conversation took place. Olivia had never addressed him in that manner before. He wasn't sure she had spoken to anyone like that at work. She maintained a strict demeanor, exuding professionalism and a focus on business at all times. However, during those 40 minutes in the stuck elevator, she transformed. And now, he couldn't stop thinking about what she had said. They've probably earned it. Those words echoed in his mind over the next few days. She continued her work as usual, yet something had changed. They began to pay closer attention in meetings, speaking up when they had something to add instead of keeping their head down. They ensured that their ideas were not merely cast aside, but were genuinely acknowledged. On Friday afternoon, something even more unexpected occurred. At her desk, she was finishing up a report when she noticed an email pop up in her inbox. The subject line appeared straightforward. They suggested having a conversation. It came from Olivia. They hesitated for a second before clicking on it. David was asked to stop by the office after work if he had time. They would like to discuss something with you. Olivia. That was the end of it. No details provided. No explanation provided. A direct and straightforward message was conveyed. He leaned back in his chair, his mind running through every possible reason she might want to talk to him. Did they screw something up? She wondered if she would bring up their conversation from the elevator. Or was this truly related to work? She attempted to maintain her focus for the remainder of the day, but it proved to be impossible. As the office began to clear out around 6, their nerves were frayed. He finally took a deep breath and made his way toward Olivia's office. The door was closed, yet the light remained on. He knocked twice. They invited the person to enter. He pushed the door open, stepping inside. She sat at her desk, her blazer removed, appearing less like the formidable boss that was typically expected. She made a motion toward the chair situated opposite her. She sat down. They did. For a moment, she remained silent. She observed him intently, as if she were attempting to unravel a mystery. She leaned back in her chair and spoke. They have been more engaged this week. He hesitated. Indeed. They suppose so. She gave a nod. It was satisfactory. That was the reason for the invitation extended to you. They straightened slightly. Everything is in order. She let out a breath and drummed her fingers on the desk. They had been reflecting on their conversation in the elevator, considering the dedication required to excel and the challenges of distinguishing oneself. They didn't say anything, just waited. Opportunities do not always present themselves, David. At times, one must take them on their own. She frowned slightly. What is being said? She inclined her head. There is an open project that requires extra hours and additional effort. While it may not be an official promotion, managing it effectively could place one in a favorable position for future advancement. They blinked. They wanted to take on more work? She wore a slight smirk. That is one perspective to consider. Another option presented is the opportunity for the individual to demonstrate their capabilities. They thought about it. This was exactly what was desired, an opportunity to stand out. It wasn't as if there was anything else happening for them. He had no girlfriend, no kids, and nothing holding him back from dedicating extra time. He nodded. They will do it. She appeared to be satisfied with the response given to her. It was satisfactory. She extended her hand to grab a folder from her desk and then pushed it in my direction. All the details are included here. They should take the weekend to review it, and then they will discuss it on Monday. They picked it up, flipping through the pages. The project was significant, far larger than anything that had been handled before. However, it was the sort of opportunity that could genuinely impact one's career. He looked back at Olivia. They expressed gratitude for the opportunity. She gave a nod. But then, before he could stand up, she said something unexpected. Additionally, there was a plan to grab a coffee tomorrow morning. If one is free, they are welcome to join. They froze for half a second. Would you like some coffee? In the company of Olivia? He wasn't sure if this was still a work-related matter, or if she was genuinely inviting him to something more personal. She seemed to sense the hesitation and added, "If you're busy, no pressure." He shook his head quickly. "No, they are free." She offered a faint smile. "Very well then, 10 in the morning." The cafe situated across from the office. He nodded, standing up. "They will see you there." As she walked out of the office, her mind was spinning. This had evolved beyond mere work. This was something extraordinary. For the first time in a long while, there was uncertainty about the direction it was heading. She barely slept that night. The invitation to coffee held a significance beyond mere coffee. It seemed to be something entirely different. It was something that eluded precise definition. Olivia had never requested to meet outside of work before. The way she framed it, casual and without pressure, added to its significance. By the time she arrived at the cafe Saturday morning, she was a mix of curiosity and nerves. He spotted Olivia immediately. She sat at a corner table, wearing a dark sweater rather than her typical business attire. She appeared different, calm and at ease, more akin to an everyday individual than an unapproachable leader. He approached, and she glanced up, giving him a small nod. "They are on time." He smirked. They realized that arriving late might not create the most favorable impression. She chuckled and gestured toward the seat across from her. He instructed her to take a seat. They did. For a moment, silence enveloped them as they both took sips of their coffee. It felt strange for him to be sitting across from her in that manner. In the workplace, a distinct hierarchy was always evident. In that moment, it seemed nearly balanced. She finally expressed her appreciation for their presence. She set her cup down. "Of course," he replied. She admitted that she was a little surprised by the invite. She observed him for a moment. David is a hard worker. They see that. However, it is evident that there has been a sense of being stuck. He nodded slowly. "That seems to be a reasonable evaluation." She let out a sigh as she gazed out the window. They understand that feeling more than one might think. She frowned slightly. "They?" She turned back to him. "One might assume that she has always had it easy. However, they ascended through the ranks with little opposition." They shrugged. "They are the boss." She emitted a gentle laugh. "They are." However, it proved to be quite challenging. It took them years to get there. And even when she did, it didn't mean the struggle stopped. He leaned forward slightly. "What does that mean?" She paused for a moment, then brought the cup to her lips for another sip of coffee. They observe her and perceive authority. Strength. It is assumed that they do not require anything from anyone. He nodded. That was exactly how he saw her at work. However, the reality was that she exhaled. "It feels lonely. No one truly perceives him, David, not in the capacity of an individual, merely a title." They weren't sure what to say to that. It was strange for him to hear her speak so openly. This was a side of Olivia that no one had ever imagined existed. She cast her gaze in his direction once more. That was the reason for their honesty in the elevator. They seemed different. In what way is it different? She inclined her head. It seemed as though they genuinely listened. It was as if they didn't see her as anything more than the boss, but as an individual. He swallowed hard. They realized that they had never considered them in any other light prior to that moment. However, when they opened up, it altered the situation. She gave a slow nod. That was the reason for wanting to have this conversation. She didn't do this often, David, allowing others to enter. However, she hesitated when it came to him. They feel like they can talk to you. There was something in the way she said that which caused his chest to tighten. He glanced down at his coffee. They understand, you see. She lifted an eyebrow in curiosity. Does one? He nodded. Though not on the same level, there is an understanding of what it feels like to be invisible, to put in effort, and yet sense that no one truly acknowledges your presence. She observed him for a moment. Their former partner. She stiffened slightly. Indeed, he mentioned in the elevator that she had cheated. She let out a small breath. Indeed, they believed they were creating something genuine. It became clear that they were merely seen as an option. Her expression softened. He was sorry. They shrugged. A long time ago it does not lessen the pain in any way. He looked at her, surprised by the sincerity in her voice. There existed no judgment, no patronizing attitude, only comprehension. For a moment, they just sat there in silence. However, it was not uncomfortable. The silence enveloped the surroundings, creating an atmosphere of safety. She then took another sip of her coffee, a slight smirk appearing on her face. There was a discussion regarding that project. She let out a small laugh. Is it time to get back to business already? She inclined her head. What is happening? They thought this was a date? Her face heated up slightly. They know. She let out a soft chuckle. You should take a moment to relax. They were just messing with them. He exhaled, shaking his head. They are impossible. She offered a smile and leaned forward just a bit. However, it should be noted that enjoyment was experienced. He met her gaze. Indeed, they too. She gave a nod. It was good. After a brief pause, she suggested that perhaps they should consider doing it again sometime. He hesitated, then nodded. Indeed, they like that. She appeared to be content with that response. For the first time since starting at the company, it became clear to him that Olivia was not merely his boss. She represented something beyond the ordinary. They weren't sure what that meant yet. However, they were willing to find out. Several months had gone by since the coffee meeting with Olivia. Changes had occurred at work, albeit not in a manner that was immediately apparent. They still did their job. They still showed up on time. They continued to put in the effort as they always had. However, Olivia became aware. She began to involve him in more meetings, assigning him to larger projects, and even sought his input on matters she previously would not have. It wasn't just about the promotion. Indeed, there had been a move up in the company. The true change lay in the way they perceived one another. They began to grab coffee more frequently. Following that, there were dinners. Then, one night, she invited him over to her place. It was the night when everything changed. He recalled standing at her doorstep, feeling as though he had just entered a situation he wasn't certain he was prepared for. It was not nerves. That is not entirely accurate. There was a sense that this was different. She was different. Olivia opened the door, her attire consisting of jeans and a sweater that conveyed a sense of casual comfort. Her typical sharpness dulled. She remarked that he had made it, stepping aside to allow him entry. The apartment was modern yet warm. The furniture was minimalist, featuring clean lines and a few personal touches that gave it a lived-in feel. He had never imagined her space before, but somehow it fit. She poured them both a glass of wine, and they sat at her living room, talking as they always did. However, on this occasion, it seemed to carry a greater weight. It was as if they both sensed an unspoken understanding lingering between them, something neither had articulated yet. Then, she looked at him. David, something in her tone caused his chest to tighten. Indeed, there was a moment of hesitation on her part. Does one regret this? She frowned. What is there to regret? She exhaled, swirling the wine in her glass, lost in thought. Whatever that is. He leaned forward. Olivia, they haven't even defined what this is yet. She emitted a soft chuckle. However, there was an almost nervous quality to it. Such an occurrence was uncommon for her. She acknowledged it. However, they both understand that it holds significance. He set his glass down. Does one feel regret about it? She took her time before responding. Instead, she looked at him, really looked at him, as if she were trying to determine whether he was worth the risk. At that moment, she finally shook her head. Negative. They do not. She released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. It was good, because they don't either. Something in her shoulders relaxed at that moment. It was clear to everyone that this situation was far from normal for David, a manager and a staff member. He knows, he said, interrupting her softly. However, they're no longer just that, are they? She remained quiet for a brief moment. Then, she reached out, her fingers lightly grazing his. It was subtle, hardly more than a whisper of touch. However, it sufficed. It was enough to convey that whatever they were, whatever this was evolving into, it was genuine. Following that night, They exercised caution. At work, everything remained the same. They maintained professionalism and ensured discretion throughout the process. However, beyond the confines of their professional lives, they found themselves together. It was not a whirlwind, reckless romance. It unfolded at a deliberate pace, with purpose behind each movement. There were stolen moments and quiet conversations. Late-night dinners followed by early morning texts. It was Olivia allowing herself to connect with someone after years of maintaining her defenses. It was a moment of realization for her, as she acknowledged that, for the first time since her ex, she genuinely desired something real once more. A year later, he found himself standing in her apartment, watching her make coffee in the kitchen. And it struck him. This was their life now. They had the career they had worked for. They had the respect they had wanted. And he had her. They never could have predicted that getting stuck in an elevator would change their life. However, there are times when moments that initially appear insignificant ultimately hold great significance.